Hello JBS viewers, I'm Charles Small. I'm the director of ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy, and welcome to the ISGAP Hour, Fighting Antisemitism. And today we're honored to have one of our scholars in residence here at our Oxford Summer Institute, Rona Kaufman. Rona Kaufman is a professor at Duquesne University in the area of law. So welcome to the JBS show.
Thank you.
And thanks for being here.
No,
thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So can you explain to the viewers what kind of scholar are you? What kind of professor of law? What's your area of research and focus?
Okay, so I've been a law professor for, I think this is my 16th year. I historically have always taught in the areas of employment discrimination, family law, gender in the law, women in the law, and constitutional law. I also taught some other courses once upon a time. And that's still what I teach in. I am developing a course on anti-Semitism in law, so that'll be the first anti-Semitism law course that I'm teaching. My scholarly focus for my entire career was really intersections of women in law, with a special focus on motherhood and also sexual violence against women. And so post-October 7th, I just published my first law review article on this topic, which was actually published in the Florida International University Law Review. And it's about the history of sexual violence against Jewish women, and it frames the Zionist movement as a Jewish women's liberation movement. I actually think that there are strong arguments that it's not just a Jewish women's liberation movement. I don't address this in this article, but in a future article. But it's really a women's liberation movement. And if you look at how Israel operates within the Middle East and how women are treated within Israel, wherever Zionism is, which is only in Israel, women do better than in all of the surrounding countries, really based on all measures. So,
who are some of the writers, the thinkers who kind of frame Zionism as a women's liberation movement? Are you the first, or you drew on other people writing on this space?
I have not seen Zionism framed ever as a Jewish women's liberation movement. I think it's a really important story. I don't think that the idea was non-existent, but I don't think it's been really conceptualized that way. And in fact, so much of the research that I was doing for that article, where I was going through really testimony that Israeli scholars have documented, testimony of women and witnesses after pogroms that were taking place in Europe in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, there's so much testimony about how women could not stay in their villages after these attacks, and how that really caused massive migration also to the United States. There was no state of Israel at the time, but some of them were also going to Palestine, and it was absolutely galvanizing the Zionist movement. I think that what we usually think of as how does this women's story and the sexual violence galvanize it, is with regard to Chaim Nachman Bialik's famous poem, City of Slaughter, which is often viewed as having had a very important impact on the Zionist movement and on motivating it. And what that poem is so famous for, in part, is about how he talks about the horrible things that happen to women and how the Jew of a trembling knee, right? Yeah. Which we hear all the time now. I mean, if there's something that the Zionist manifestation of the state of Israel stands for, is that we are no longer Jews with trembling knees.
Interesting. And also, I think the space of Jewish women in the feminist movement, or the women's movement, is interesting. I was raised by a feminist who was active in during the 70s, and there was the Year of Why Not, the International Year of Women, and the Jewish feminists in Canada were basically removed from the feminist movement around that time. So sort of history obviously seems to be repeating itself. So do you feel, writing about the women's movement, and I know you've been involved in your research dealing with issues of women and sexism and sexual violence, do you feel among your colleagues that there's a space for women in the feminist movement or within feminist scholarship, or are Jewish women being kind of pushed aside?
Jewish women are definitely getting pushed aside. I mean, I think thanks to ISGAP and being in community with people, similarly minded women scholars, I think that we really need to start working together to create an alternative, because I don't think it's just Jewish women who are being pushed out. I think there are many other women who are also being pushed out. But actually the article that I wrote was really, I started writing that article before October 7th. And it was a response to kind of the Linda Sarsour probably made it most famous. You can't be Jewish and Zionist. And, I take it's such an absurd statement. And of course, my very existence refutes the claim. So originally I was just writing to assert, what Zionism means for Jewish women and what feminism is and the ways in which Zionism and feminism are really, symbiotic. They are not in conflict at all. Then, of course, October 7th happened, and that really, changed in part the direction of my article.
So the direction of your article, but also did your scholarship and the focus of your scholarship shift after October the 7th? Was your view of anti-Semitism in general, and maybe anti-Semitism in the United States, was it significantly changed with October 7th? Did you see it coming, the explosion of anti-Semitism? Like how did you perceive this sort of changing landscape?
Yeah, so I did see it coming. I did not take it seriously enough. So I'm in the in-between group of people. There are those who really had no idea what was coming, and those who have been warning about it, like you, for over a decade. I would say that I first really started to notice it probably around 2014 during the war in Gaza. At that time, I had been in Israel. When I came back to the U.S. and hearing the rhetoric in the U.S. and so many of the lies that were being spread at that time, I really realized there was a problem, just as far as anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. As far as my work, right, I thought I was just gonna, my plan was just to start addressing the Jewish feminist piece. But now I have completely shifted 100% of my scholarly efforts toward not just the Jewish feminist piece, but also just anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism in academia. And what another thing I'm thinking about when you were asking about and talking about your mom and in Canada, Jewish women were instrumental, certainly in the U.S. I don't know much about what was going on in Canada at the time, but second wave feminism Jewish women were, I don't know what the strongest word would be, but instrumental is not strong enough. And what I have seen in recent years is a erasing of the Jewish history of that feminist movement. In fact, recently I read it was like a very short biography of Ruth Bader Ginsburg for an award after her name or something like that, and it referred to her as a Ukrainian immigrant, which is so outrageous, right? Because she was a Jewish immigrant escaping Ukrainian violence against Jews and Jewish women. And I think that's symbolic of what we've seen. It's not just that Jewish women are being marginalized within mainstream feminism and definitely within feminist legal scholarship, but also an erasure of the Jewish role, of a really important Jewish role in launching the feminist movement and the civil rights movement for women.
So coming from a strong, feminist background and a scholar, I know your roots are actually in Israel. I think you were born in Israel. Were you,
almost.
Almost born in Israel. Okay, explain in a minute. But I know your daughter, a young woman, went back to Israel, made Aliyah, and she's a lone soldier there. Could you explain your connection to Israel and what it means to you?
Thanks. So my parents are Israeli, and they were born in Israel. So their parents were Holocaust survivors who made Aliyah in 1948, and then my parents were born in 1949 and 1950, all from Poland.
Okay.
Actually Belarus now, but otherwise from Poland. One was born in Hungary, but raised in Poland. And so my parents grew up in Israel, were raised in Israel. My mother actually moved to the US with her parents as a teenager, who really, my grandmother just did not have the constitution to be able to, continue warring with people. And the story that really affected me growing up and hearing was that I think it was in the 1950s at some point, early after they had moved to Israel, there had just been, an attack on the village that they were living in, and a Jewish family in the village was massacred, and, very October 7th style, children cut to pieces and terrible things. And basically my grandmother was already trying to get to the United States at that point. So anyway, took them many years to get visas. They moved to the United States. I was born in the United States, raised in the United States, but very much in Philadelphia and very much in part of, in an Israeli and Holocaust survivor community. And And so we spent a lot of time in Israel. I grew up going to Israel. Hebrew was my first language. And then my children, I raised them very much, they had a lot of exposure to Israel growing up, trips to Israel, Jewish day school, Jewish camp, Alexander Muss High School in Israel, which I'm a huge proponent of that program. And then when she graduated high school in 2021, she made Aliyah.
Nice.
And then served as a soldier, which thank God her service is now over.
Nice, good. So you mentioned that you were born from Israeli parents, immigrant parents, and grew up with Holocaust survivors and Israelis. I grew up in Montreal, and I think Canadian Jews, and in particular Jews from Quebec, are a little bit more traditional, or actually much more traditional than many American Jews. But growing up in that environment of Israeli immigrants and Holocaust survivors, do you think your Jewish identity was different than many of the kind of the second, third generation Ashkenazi Jews in the United States, in Philadelphia? Was there a difference?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. In Philadelphia, that was my community. I mean, and there were kids in my school certainly who didn't have a Holocaust family background or who weren't recent immigrants, but really that was my community. It wasn't until I've lived in Pittsburgh now for 16 years, and Pittsburgh is a very different Jewish community where many of the Jewish families in Pittsburgh have been there for many, many, many generations. And now it's only in recent years that I'm really, also probably because of fractures within the Jewish community, that I see the difference. And one of the things that I think we don't talk about enough in terms of how many American Jews, those who don't identify with Israel and don't feel a strong connection to Israel, I think it comes from a place of extreme privilege that their story, and I think oftentimes demographically that plays out, not always. There are some incredible loyal Jews who, and then there are some people who have come from Israel and have crazy views. But as a general matter, I think this idea that that Jews who have been in the United States for a very long time and who have had the benefits of living in this golden Medina, they're so distanced from Jewish history, and also they really don't feel connected to Jews across the world. It's during our lifetime that we've seen many major aliyot, whether it's from the USSR or from Ethiopia or more recently from France. Jews in the rest of the world have been in peril during this wonderful time that we've been living very freely in the United States of America and in Canada. And I think those of us who come from families where it's not such a distant past, we are much more aware of it and in tune with it and more connected to global Jewry as opposed to feeling like we are just American Jews.
And do you think that maybe there's a silver lining? Do you think post-October 7th, the United States, that there's a shift, that American Jews are increasingly identifying with Israel and other Jewish communities around the world? Or do you see segments of the society even becoming more assimilated and distancing themselves from the community and from Israel? How do you perceive the trends?
I think those who were connected to Israel are becoming more connected to global Jewry and more connected to Jewish history. And I think among those who were disconnected, some of them are amazing allies and advocates, and they're totally like reconnecting with their own Jewish history. People who consider themselves October 8th Jews. Right. But I think we're also seeing many Jews who are, they're actually going back to this the old like German Reform version of Judaism, where, what are you talking about? We're not a people. We don't have a history. We have nothing to do with the land. There's no language. We're just, this is just a religion that we picked up. It's bizarre because they're oftentimes very educated people. And so I don't understand this like selective memory, but I think many are thinking of themselves that way. And I think certainly, I think it's more prevalent in the Reform movement and the Reconstructionist movement, both movements that I identified with for many years of my adult life. I think it's very prevalent there. And I'm predicting a fracture, honestly. Yeah.
Do you feel your Judaism, your Jewish practice has changed since October 7th?
Mine have, yeah. I was raised, like Israeli secular kind of, and we did the Chagim. I intentionally raised my kids a step more traditional and more observant than I was raised. Just, I think, recognizing that in the U.S., assimilation is inevitable if you don't make really serious efforts to prevent it. But since October 7th, I never understood prayer the way I understand prayer. Like I mean, I just had a really blessed life, and I didn't need prayer like I've needed prayer. And I'm so thankful. Actually, one of my rabbis in Pittsburgh said at in one of his speeches at some point that, like, you know, those of you who are feeling lost and troubled and scared, we have a framework for this. Yeah. And so I've really leaned into that, and I'm really thankful that we have a framework for this.
Yeah, I think it's important. That's beautiful, in my humble opinion. Also at ISGAP, we have a program called Jewish Consciousness, which is sort of trying to educate mostly students and actually scholars about the wisdom and the culture that we come from and how we define ourselves as a people. I think, unfortunately, the anti-Semites historically define us, and sometimes we internalize those definitions, or we're, you know, we try to grapple with them. So, you know, in Europe we were portrayed as not white, which led to the Holocaust, the racist anti-Semitism. And in the United States, our detractors are saying we're white and we're privileged and we're racist. And a lot of American Jews who are not grounded in who we are as a people are lost. And, you know, they have white guilt and they're not sure who they are. So it's important to know who we are and where we come from.
Completely agree. Completely.
Cool. So one more question. The ISGAP Oxford Summer Institute. What, you know, now that you're here, it's very intense. We're winding down. What were your impressions of it, and how did you benefit from it? I hope you did. And in what ways did it help you or provide you with a network? I don't know. What are your takeaways from the program?
Yeah, so I loved it. First of all, thank you. I'm so glad that I was able to participate in this, and I love how long it is, even though it's a ton of information, right? So like, there's a fatigue aspect to having so many incredible scholars lecture on every different aspect of anti-Semitism, Jewish history, diversity in the Middle East, Islamism. Like, there's so many topics and there's so much getting covered, but it's really, really, really intense. But I loved every minute of it. I've taken incredible notes, and I can't even tell you what it's going to turn into afterwards. There's no question that it will enrich my scholarship, and it will enrich my teaching. I'm creating a course. I was already creating a course on anti-Semitism and law, so this will enrich that as well. And also my activism, in all honesty. Like, it's going to enrich all of that. And then on top of that, the networking. And I think that that's really a critical piece. I feel like we're very siloed. We know we're very siloed. And I've always been a really active member of my Jewish community, but our, you know, legacy Jewish communal organizations are, you know, in some very important ways failing us. And so I think organization like ISGAP and a conference like this in particular, where you're bringing together so many scholars and so many teachers from different areas and experts, so that we can learn together and strategize and also kind of mourn together, you know, like I think that that's also a theme of this, is that it's very emotional and it's very hard to be, you know, it's scary and depressing, and to be scared and depressed alone, be scared and depressed in community with people who really care about this. So I think it's been amazing. I'm so appreciative.
Yeah. I'm glad you appreciated it, and it was a positive experience. And I think, yeah, I agree. We have amazing experts and scholars. But it's also interesting, I think, during the tea breaks and the meals, just to see people connecting and networking and brainstorming. It's really, I think maybe that's the most important, just bringing an amazing group of scholars together for 2 intensive weeks of training, but also socializing and networking is very empowering.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so we're honored that you were a part of it.
I'm so glad I got to.
And thanks for taking the time to be here for 2 weeks and to be on our JBS TV show.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Rona Kaufman from Duquesne University, professor of law.
Thank you.
I'm really honored to be joined by one of our colleagues, Caryn Bloch, who's a professor of psychology and I think leadership as well. You'll explain that in a moment, at Teachers College at Columbia University in New York. So Caryn, thank you for being here, and thanks for joining us for the Summer Institute. Your lectures were incredible and inspiring for many people. For our viewers, I know you're a professor of psychology at Teachers College and you also do leadership. Could you explain what leadership education is all about?
Sure. The type of psychology I do is organizational psychology, so it looks at individuals and teams, how they work most effectively, what gets in their way, and an important part of that is the climate that their leader sets. So it's really a combination of psychology and leadership, and some of the leadership education that I've been involved with is working with leaders so that they can get to know themselves better, the things that they prefer to do, the things they don't prefer to do, and the impact that has on the people they work with.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think we have to have a conversation off camera. I'm sure I can learn from you. And your research, I guess before October the 7th was focusing on gender issues as well, or specifically, or other issues as well? Other
issues as well. I think the broad stroke of what the research was about was trying to identify some of the factors that leaders might not be aware of that get in the way of people being able to bring their best game to their work. And so what I would look at is what are some of the barriers that people face due to not gender or race, but the meaning of gender in a given environment, if you're the only woman who's a geoscientist, or the meaning of race in a given environment, if you're the one African American investment banking associate on a team at Goldman Sachs. And what is it that about that environment that people need to be aware of, but also that leaders need to be aware of so that they really are getting the best of everybody who's working with them.
So your research will focus on, say, the lone woman or the lone African American in an environment, or trying to work with leaders to, create an environment that they can get the best out of their team? Like what?
Yes and yes. Okay. So the focus has been both. The early part of my career, it was about identifying these barriers and what they are, so that you could inform leaders, hey, these barriers exist, but also inform the people experiencing these kind of stereotypes that they weren't going crazy, that this was the reality. So there was part that, and then another part of it was looking at different styles people have and how people have really successful careers in environments where they are contending with stereotypes about them and constantly having to prove themselves. And then in addition to that, it's then also morphed into leadership development, and then what can leaders do about it? And so it's really, over the course of the last 25 years, been all of those things. And then also looking at some of the ambient environmental cues that let people know this is a place where we think you'll succeed, or maybe not.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I guess the big elephant in the room, the question is, how was your work or perspective affected from October the 7th onwards? Was it a big shift in your research and your gaze into your work, into your professional career and personal career? Because I know you were at Teachers College, which is adjacent to Columbia University, which everybody knows had a very difficult environment for many years, but it really came to the fore on October the 8th or 9th after the pogrom of October the 7th. So.
Yeah, it's had a profound effect on my research, which is why I'm sitting here today with you. For probably the 5 years prior to October 7th, I had noticed that in the social justice space, that there was less of a place to have a Jewish identity. And I really became curious about how, they say research is me search, so how were people like me who were social justice activists, but also Jews, how were they really grappling with these identities at the time? And so it was always on my to-do list, something I dreamt of doing. And then I had been told by probably 3 or 4 students in some of the leadership training, you talk about these other dimensions of identity, but why don't you talk about Jewish identity? And I really didn't know that it was going to be an issue in the workplace or in universities that it ended up being. So when October 7th happened, I had been in conversation with Yael Silverstein, who is an ISGAP Summer Institute graduate from last year. And we had been talking about doing this research, but then on October 8th, it just became really clear that we needed to study the experiences that Jews were having in universities and in the workplace, and there really wasn't a way to assess the ambient anti-Semitism. So we ended up doing that, and that has been the focus of my research for the last 2 years. Still doing the other research, but this is the thing that I'm most passionate about and that I'd like to focus on for the remainder of my career, because Jews on university campuses like Columbia are in an environment where because of the meaning of being Jewish in that situation, people are treating them differently. People are reacting to them differently. They're having to decide what parts of their selves they bring to work, what parts of themselves they conceal, where they fit in. And so all of the things that I had been studying prior absolutely apply now. And we have a tremendous need for that research. And part of what I've loved about being here for the last couple weeks is hearing people's stories, hearing Jews' stories about how they've been excluded either by other Jews who have a different view than they have, by universities, in the workplace, by people they thought were friends. And so I feel like a lot of the research that's happening on anti-Semitism is needed to get to the bottom of it, and where is it coming from, and why do people hold those attitudes. A place where there's less research is how do we take care of ourselves, and how do we provide the right services, interventions, leadership, environments for Jews who right now are really having to contend with so much anti-Semitism.
So it's wonderful to hear, and I know, as you know, ISGAP is really committed to high caliber research and trying to get experts to really take their expertise at a high level of serious scientific research and apply their skills in trying to map and decode contemporary anti-Semitism. And I think the work that you and Yael Silverstein did was really high caliber research that really sheds light on how Jews are impacted by contemporary anti-Semitism. So can you explain to the listeners, the viewers,
Sure,
what your research shows and what you've discovered?
Yes, so what we wanted to do was to understand ambient anti-Semitism and how it is that anti-Semitism is being expressed in these times. So we relied on previous research and theory that had been done with other groups to understand how the ambient kind of racism or sexism is expressed. And we use the framework of microaggressions, which are subtle insults or slurs that can convey a lack of belonging in a situation. So we use that literature, and in addition, we looked at the literature on historical anti-Semitism so that we would understand what it is. And then we developed more than 100 items. We then went to experts in the field of both microaggressions and anti-Semitism to see what items were the clearest and the most relevant. And then we gave our scale out to probably like 250 or so people that we could get who were on college campuses at the time. Faculty, staff, and students, of course, and found that there was a significant correlation between these ambient experiences of anti-Semitism and race-based traumatic stress, such as anxiety, depression, intrusive thoughts, and also organizational commitment. They were less committed to the universities. So what these results tell us is that there is a relationship between experiencing ambient anti-Semitism and mental health. What we hope to do next in our research is to look at this beyond the university. So we have 2 samples from the general population, one which is actually a random sample that the Anti-Defamation League Center for Anti-Semitism Research was responsible for helping us to get this sample to see, what are these effects for the Jewish community at large? Are these effects different for people who are visibly Jewish versus those who aren't visibly Jewish? What are the effects that might be different for Israelis versus people who are US-based Jews? So we're trying to put this together, and that's to demonstrate the negative effects, but also to look at some of the mitigating factors and what can help when you experience ambient anti-Semitism to not have it have such an effect on your mental health. And some of where we're going to go to look to that is the existing literature on racism and sexism. And so we know that activism is something that helps.
Interesting.
Yeah, and another thing that helps.
As a coping mechanism?
As a coping mechanism. So we can think about that for all of us at ISGAP.
Yeah,
doing activism work, that when you experience the anti-Semitism and you are doing activist work, it doesn't lead to the same extent always of negative mental health outcomes.
Interesting. So is activism healthy for you?
I think activism can be healthy for somebody, but then the other thing you have to make sure is that you have to take care of yourself through the activism, because as a coping strategy, if we're activists, we can, we're doing it from our heart, and it can take all of the time we have. And so I worry if we're only activists, then we really will burn ourselves out, because it's such a huge job. and there's so much to do. One other thing that I wanted to mention that we're going to be investigating is social support, which is another thing that this ISGAP 2-week conference provides, is that there's a protective mechanism when you can tell your story and get some support from other people who are going through this. So I found the conversations that I've been having here to also be really helpful, because you realize you're not alone in experiencing it, and it is a sense of community that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think the lectures are amazing, the academic program is amazing, but perhaps the most important part of the whole summer institute are the tea breaks and the meals that people have together, and they could share, network professionally, but also on a personal level.
So I bet you didn't realize, Charles, that by providing this conference, it's not just to share knowledge, but it's a mental health intervention because of the activism and the social support that we're getting to experience together.
Cool. So for the viewers are sometimes skeptical about, they perceive often academics are in the clouds, we don't know how to tie our shoes very well. What is your research and other research of our colleagues, why is it important? Why is it important to the Jewish community to engage in scholarly research on contemporary anti-Semitism?
Well, I think it's important because so often we hear there really isn't an anti-Semitism problem. I haven't talked about Columbia that much, but we heard very often that the students on campus, really they were being too sensitive, they were whining. And I think what our research does is demonstrate that there is a relationship between exactly what's happening on campuses and even these minor types of anti-Semitism and well-being. And so I think that once that's clear, then administrators really can't ignore the idea that this is all fine and this is Jewish students being too sensitive, because it is far from the truth.
Wonderful. And do you plan to present your research to the administrators of Columbia University and other academic institutions and to help combat anti-Semitism on campus?
Absolutely. And Yael Silverstein and I have an article that was published in the Jewish Journal of Education, which is really more of a journal for Jewish educators than academics, because we wanted them to have a sense of this. Yes. And we have sent our article to the administrators at Teachers College, Columbia University, that's the area that I'm in, and they want us to do a presentation in the fall so that the other faculty can realize that the kind of anti-Semitic experiences happening on campus are real and have mental health effects and are similar to the racism and sexism that an institution like Teachers College was designed to be there to, fight.
Right. That reminds me of a study I did with a professor named Edward Kaplan at Yale. Mm-hmm. We interviewed 10,000 people in 10 European countries, and we showed the correlation between Israel bashing and classical forms of anti-Semitism, and the correlation was off the charts. So those who were anti-Israel were 13 times more likely to be anti-Semitic in the classical sense. And this sort of boring, surveys, many Jewish people read it, said, of course, that's the correlation, we all know that. But when you prove things scientifically, you can impact university policy. We lay the groundwork in a way for the IRA definition, because we prove scientifically that bashing Israel is a form of anti-Semitism, or could be a form of anti-Semitism. So scientific research really helps to change the discourse and even policy.
I think that's right. And another audience that I hope we're going to try and publish this research for are the DEI academics, because I think that using frameworks that they're familiar with to show how anti-Semitic experiences are similar to racism is very important. And one of the things I've noted in talking to people at this conference and doing the lecture that I've done on our work is that the younger people seem really excited about this, because it speaks their language and it gives them a way to speak about their experiences with anti-Semitism that their peers and colleagues will understand.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. I think there's two tendencies at the Summer Institute, and those the scholars that are looking at anti-Semitism. Many are dismissing DEI and critical race theory as inherently anti-Semitic, and there's definitely a problem with the DEI framework and critical race theory. It has been exclusionary for Jews and Jewish community and students and faculty, but I think what you're doing is really urgently important, because we can use these tools to show what is going on in the United States and institutions and the rise of anti-Semitism and the impact it's having. And I think there are scholars that are committed to scientific rigor, and they're fair, and if we can prove things scientifically, I'm sure many will hear and understand. So that this work is really important. And
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater,
No.
but we should struggle and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that the reason that the DEI frameworks have been, not so explanatory for anti-Semitism is because they are context-free. And so oppressor, oppressed is kind of defined in every situation. And yet we have to consider the context. And it's being able to handle the complexity of a situation where oppressed and oppressor is not as clear. And something, I don't know if this will come out on camera, but Project Shema did some wonderful anti-Semitism training with us at Columbia. And they talked about a graph about time and oppression. And they demonstrated that for many other oppressed groups, if you have been oppressed for a long time, you continue to maybe get a little bit better. And for those groups that tend to have power, they tend to really have their level of power. But when they talked about the experience of Jews and oppression or power over time, they made everybody hold up their fingers. And they said, look, here's what happens to the Jews. At first, they don't have a lot of power. And then all of a sudden they're doing well, and they're doing quite well here in Oxford, England, and then boom, they've lost their power. And so that really for the Jews, it's a different experience. And I feel like that's what we have to be trying to talk to people about, is our experience with power, and oppression.
It's a profound point. Thank you for sharing. And any final thoughts on the Summer Institute, your impression, your experience here?
It's been a wonderful experience. I've met people from all over with very different opinions. It's open. People say what they think. And Charles does an amazing job of seeing everyone that's in the room, holding it together, tying comments together, and making everybody feel a part of something that is a greater whole, which it absolutely is. I've learned so much, and I'm very grateful.
It's very kind of you, and really thank you for being here. It's an honor that you're here, and your work is really important. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.